McCulloch?
Here.
Mr. Siegel?
Here.
Mr. Connor?
Here.
Ms. Stanford?
Here.
With 7 present, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Before we go any further, I'd like to thank Connor, who's working behind the scenes to help us produce the board's meeting on Channel 20 tonight, so thank you. Remind board members that you hold your questions until the presentation is done, so you may need to take notes for that. Reminder that masks for everybody in here have to stay on, covering your mouth and nose as well. So, first order of business is the meeting minutes of December 1st, 2020. Are there any changes, corrections, or additions to the meeting minutes? None. We'll take a consensus to approve that. Thank you. As we have recognitions tonight, the internal external stakeholders portion of the meeting will be moved to the beginning of our meeting. And Mr. Siegel, the floor is yours, sir.
We're having technical issues. Can you give me just 1 minute? Yes. I will never mock Mr. Rollins again for using a paper agenda. Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the next semester, and Happy New Year to everyone. Tonight, we have a couple of recognitions. I am super excited that we are going to have them because it's been a while. Our first recognition tonight is for Matt Hotop. The Illinois Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages recently awarded Jefferson High School Spanish teacher Matt Hotop with the Distinguished Service to Foreign Language Learning Award for exemplary teaching and training for the region. The award recognizes educators whose exemplary teaching has provided inspiration to large numbers of foreign language students or teachers. Ray Mueller, the curriculum dean for secondary English language arts and world languages, wrote in the 205 Vibe, Matt is an expert teacher who has influenced countless current and future educators in the field of world languages. Matt has had a great hand in the curriculum design process for world languages in Rockford Public Schools. Served as the lead teacher on our curriculum leadership team. The group's task was to write and implement a new curriculum for RPS 205 World Languages. This is no small feat, as RPS 205 offers French, Spanish, Heritage Spanish, American Sign Language, Mandarin Chinese. Now serves as his building curriculum implementation leader for world languages and continues to help problem solve when implementing curricular shifts to make learning a language most impactful for all RPS 205 world language students. Congratulations, Matt, on this well-deserved recognition. Not see him here, though. There he is.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here, Matt, by Zoom. It's good to see you, other than through email.
Yeah, technology is great.
So 2 RPS 205 teachers have recently renewed their national board certification through the National Board Resource Center at Illinois State University and the Illinois National Board for Professional Teaching Standards Comprehensive Support System. Congratulations to Kelly Giardini, a teacher at Summerdale Early Childhood Center, and Jill Moth, a teacher at Maria Montessori at Marsh. Thank you both for your continued dedication to your students, and congratulations on this outstanding achievement.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we have an intergovernmental agreement with Bayer and the Rockford Park District. It's us in Rockford Park District for Bayer School. But Rockford Park District is currently working on improvements to the outfield at Bayer Park, which include constructing an outfield fence and scoreboard. Additional property is needed to adjust the distance of the outfield fence to meet design requirements. Rockford Public Schools District 205 will convey 5,860 square feet, or a little over 1/10 of an acre, to Rockford Park District, which will provide the necessary area to meet the 300-foot outfield fence design requirements. In return, the Rockford Park District will convey 1,417 square feet, or 0.03 acres, and playground equipment designed for preschool-aged children ages 2 to 5 years to Rockford Public Schools. Part of the property exchange, the Rockford Park District will remove playground equipment designed for school-aged children ages 5 to 12 and will partially remove playground surfacing and border materials. Included in the agreement is the installation of new fencing around the preschool-aged playground equipment. The intergovernmental agreement provides a partnership opportunity to enhance Bayer Park and provide an additional safe playground to better serve our early childhood students. Bayer Early Childhood Center. Do have files to look at that does show the land that will be exchanged or modified along with the playground equipment. You can certainly find that on your board docs. The next item up, I guess I should ask, are there any questions on the intergovernmental agreement with the Park District?
I did have one. I was curious as what was going to happen with the older kids' equipment that we're removing. Is that going to be reused in our district somewhere, or? No?
That's Park District equipment,
Yes,
Mr.
okay.
Scrivano, so they'll just be removing it. We didn't want the larger playground equipment that
Understand.
could potentially.
Okay.
I'm now moving on to item D, which is the early development instrument and the ready to learn movement with cooperation with Erickson. Do have presentation in here.
Good evening. I apologize, our setup is a little bit different this time, so sorry for the delay. I'm gonna go ahead, and this is not the right presentation. A fantastically long walk from the computer to my chair. Okay, so you're seeing the EDI is really the item that we're reporting on tonight, but the EDI, or the Early Development Instrument, is not able to be separated from its corresponding community movement, which is the Ready to Learn initiative. So you have a few resources attached to your board docs. The first is the PDSA annual review form. That's the one that looks like this. It should look very familiar to you. It has in a written format all of the details of our goals, how we measured them, whether or not we've met them, and then our recommendations moving forward. So there's your written report. The second is the presentation that I have pulled up here that I'm going to partner with Anisha Grimmett to present to you. We're going to do kind of a reminder of what the EDI is, what our goals were, how much we invested, and then I'm going to hand it over to Anisha to be able to share what our community partners have done with us and what we've accomplished over the last couple of years. The third attachment that you have is a welcome letter to our most recent grant award to allow this work to continue to grow. So this really is a Tier 2 PDSA annual review in terms of the financial investment of the district in the EDI, but it's important to report on the progress of the movement as a whole. So that's our goal tonight. We began with an effort in collaboration between community partners and the school district. And what we acknowledged really early on in our work together is that it's more than a collaboration, it really is a movement, and we've used that word ever since we began our work together. Our work in the EDI was triggered first by listening to our community saying that they really wanted to support children and families, but they didn't really know exactly how to do that. And you all may have participated in multiple activities where we have, kind of Post-it notes around the walls of a particular room, and we're brainstorming, what is it that we can do? How can we rely on each other in order to make improvement in the schools? And what we realized pretty quickly is that we were missing some crucial data in order to best align our resources. And so a partnership was born between Alignment Rockford, Transform Rockford, and us as the public schools. But we didn't stop there. We also included private and parochial schools, and then 40 pilot team members from multiple sectors across our community. From that, we arrived really at these broad goals: to assess and improve kindergarten readiness, but at a neighborhood level. And I'll go through the EDI, what it is and what its goals are again here in just a little bit. Because we want to ensure that all kids are ready to learn when they enter school. We wanted to align our resources to improve their early childhood experiences, whether they were with us as a school district or in other high-quality care environments. We also wanted to turn our eye toward equitable distribution of resources, and that we had solid data to guide our community planning. So it's been a while since we've talked about the EDI. You've had a written update as the board, but I want to just kind of quickly take us back to what this tool is and why we used it. The EDI is a community needs assessment. It's also called a kindergarten census. And if you remember, it measures 5 developmental domains. Those developmental domains are physical health and well-being, language and cognitive development, social competence, which if you remember is the way that children behave in structured environments, emotional maturity is how children respond in unstructured environments, and then communication skills and general knowledge. The reason why it's important to identify these 5 developmental domains is because they point to the purpose of the EDI in looking at the whole child. And so this is not just about their academic performance. This is about their general health and well-being in the most critical stage of their life, which is their first 5 years. It's also really important to remember that the EDI does not report on individual children. It doesn't identify specific learning disabilities, has nothing to do with special education, or even informing teaching approaches. And most certainly, it is not just a reflection on the performance of a school or quality of teaching. One of our challenges in getting kind of this alignment with community partners is to pull the focus from exclusively looking at what's happening within the walls of the school to looking at what's happening within the boundary of a neighborhood or a census tract, so that we can get more clear on the full experience of the child and not just the academic experience. So this is a pretty massive data collection endeavor. We collected data on every kindergarten student in RPS. We also invited multiple private and parochial schools. We hope to expand that as we move forward. There's a lot of numbers here on this slide. The most important is that we collected 2004 records. And if you look at the very bottom, it's difficult here, but if you look on the very bottom, you can see that 1,862 were mapped, so more than 99% of those records were mapped, which means that they counted in our data collection. We had 34 schools participate. That's all of our schools plus some partners. And the result of this data, if you remember, was that we were looking at students that were on track and students that were at risk and students that were vulnerable. The blue, the vulnerable, is those that are in the bottom 10th percentile nationally. Now, if you remember, the UCLA keeps the repository, the national repository of all this data. The orange, the at-risk, is between the 11th and 25th percentile. We consider both of those categories to be not on track. So on track is between the 26th and the 100th, not on track is below the 25th, but we're paying special attention to that vulnerable population in the bottom 10th percentile. Why does this matter? Well, it's important for us if we're looking at kind of aligning our efforts, aligning our resources, we need to know where to put those resources. So it's important for us to look not only at our neighborhood by neighborhood, but how we as a Rockford community compare nationally. And if you let your eyes take a quick scan of this slide, you'll see that that blue bar is either slightly or significantly higher in Rockford than the national norm in multiple categories. Not all categories, but multiple categories. I will point out that when we talk to kindergarten teachers, one of the things that jumped off the page the most to them is that in social competence, our children have a very small margin of increased vulnerability compared to the national average. And many of them credit the strength of our early childhood program as a district for that number. So what I'd like to do now, after that brief overview of what the EDI is, as a reminder, we have some critical partners in this work. One of them is the Erickson Institute. And when we adopted this and you invested $200,000 in executing this instrument, we heard a lot from Jacqueline Vasquez, who's the Associate Director for the EDI at Erickson. And she's come alongside us throughout this entire journey to help us start from data collection into goal setting, into action. Anisha is here to take over now and map out the rest of our accomplishments. We also have a strong partner in David Sidney through Transform Rockford. That partnership began with the very first day of this, and it has continued on. So that we don't share things, I'm going to continue with the clicker. So Anisha, you can go ahead and take it from here.
There you go. Can you hear me now? Happy New Year, everyone. It's been such a long time. Good to see your faces, even behind masks. So glad to see that everyone is happy and healthy. As Heidi pointed out, we have been on this journey now for about 3 years. It seems like it's gone on really fast, and we also had to take a reflection back to look back all of the things that we had accomplished with your funding opportunity and through this effort. And just once again want to say thank you for helping to make this movement move forward. Since your investment of $200,000, here for my slides. With your investment of $200,000, we have had great successes year over year. So in our first year, we had about 67% of our schools within the Rockford Public School boundaries, private and parochial schools that participated. Within those schools, we had over 2,000 EDI records, or over 2,000 kindergarten students were assessed, and that was all part of the wave one of the EDI. We also developed a cross-sector pilot team, which consisted of 2 of the Rockford Public School board members here, Mr. Scrivano and Mr. Siegel. Thank you so much for being part of that initiative. We also built a cross-communications team to ensure that we had aligned messaging within the schools and within our community. We also trained 40 data ambassadors. What they did is that they learned more about the EDI and learned how to talk with other community members and organizations about the purpose of the EDI, and then also how to use them within their own organizations. Also conducted 40 community gallery walks, which some of you participated in about 2 summers ago, where we took the EDI maps throughout the community and asked reflectful and insightful questions on the data. And that helped us categorize and receive contextual feedback that then informed how we were going to structure the Ready to Learn movement and our teams going forward. Some more of our recent wins happened last year in 2020, where, like I said before, we were able to build a structure based upon the contextual feedback that we received from the gallery walks, and that framework turned out to be about 5 teams. Of those 5 teams, we were able to recruit 150 volunteers. So we're increasing our participation in this movement from the 40 pilot team members now up to 150 volunteers. A really great aspect and a really great win is that we were starting to develop and launch these teams at the beginning of last year, and then COVID happened. We had already gone through orientation and onboarding for many of the team members, but really were kind of hesitating whether or not we should continue the movement. And through the conversations with board members, executive team members of Alignment Rockford, they really saw the urgency and the need to do it more than ever. So we went ahead and we launched all teams in May. So all teams have been meeting virtually since May of 2020. And a lot of the teams have been meeting bi-weekly, some monthly, and some quarterly. With that, 7 organizations have used the EDI to inform their strategic planning. The YMCA has used it. One Body Collaborative actually used it to help build resource sheets for various neighborhoods. The Rockford Regional Health Council has used the data in conjunction with their community health study that was just, I think that was just put out earlier this year or late last year. The Rockford Housing Authority, they also used it to inform their strategic planning. The Family Peace Center actually used it to apply for multiple grants, the most recent one being the R3 grant. CASA also used it to inform its annual strategic plan, and the Church of the Good Shepherd, their church leaders actually used the EDI data to inform their decision to repurpose the building to ensure that when they were partnering with institutions, that it actually aligned with the neighborhood's needs using the EDI. And we thought that was a really, really great win. And last but not least, our Rockford Public Schools, you guys also used the data in the midst of COVID when we really needed to find where families needed food and ensure that those students were getting the meals that they needed. And so those slides really highlighted how your investment and the Ready to Learn movement helped to align the community to use a common data set. So that was a great win, and that helped to inform their work and their services. This slide, however, highlights dollars that we've been awarded to advance and accelerate the movement. So far, we received over $700,000 as a result of your investment. The first award was from the Community Foundation of Northern Illinois, and they helped us to hire a full-time dedicated project manager for the Ready to Learn movement. It's a 3-year grant, and we are very thankful for that because this person is definitely guiding and leading this work amongst all of the 5 teams. Second award, which I believe you have the welcome letter in your packet, is from the Illinois Action for Children, and it's for the Community Saturation Parenting Grant, which will lead and guide a lot of our work for the next 2.5 years, and we'll have I'll talk about that a little bit later. Through this grant, we will be able to saturate the community with early childhood care supports and resources, and then also test how that leads to measurable changes in parenting beliefs, skills, and improved outcomes for kindergarten readiness. How are we using the EDI? How are we continuing to use it? We talk about these teams. Here is our structure now. I know it's a lot at the bottom. I'll go into each individual team here, but we do have 2 support teams and we have 2 alignment, or what we call them, our work in action teams. First support team is community connectors. On this team, we have our nonprofits, neighborhood groups, and individuals, businesses, and they will use the data and report on their own work planning services. And a lot of those organizations that I talked about earlier that I use the EDI to inform their strategic planning or to write for grants, they are a part of this team. And their goal is really to identify how more people and organizations can be a part of this movement and use this data to inform their work. Policy Roundtable. A team consists of policymakers from the cities, counties, schools, state and federal partners, private schools as well, and other key institutions. And their goal is really around developing common plans for neighborhoods, not just for the Rockford community as a whole, but for their neighborhoods. They will be, asking guiding questions around how can policy and local, state, and national level be aligned to support this work, but also what obstacles need to be removed. They will also learn about proposed early childhood state policies that need their support, and will be connecting with state level initiatives such as the Early Childhood Funding Coalition, commissioned by the Governor's Office, and Ready Nation, a state level organization that's focused on developing the business community to be advocates for early childhood. And we have 2 members here from the board that's on that team as well. Now to our working teams. These teams are the alignment teams that will be using our alignment process. They will be doing gap analysis, developing pilots, really focused on measurable outcomes. First team is the Early Childhood Continuity Team. Their really guiding goal in Flores is they really want to understand how can children have high quality early childhood experiences wherever they live and whoever they are. How can we make programs stronger and more aligned? How can we improve access to and knowledge of those programs as well? Since COVID, we have come to the realization that access to these programs means many forms of early childhood resources for families. So this team recently decided to focus in on how to really lift parents up and provide the resources that they need, no matter what their early learning choices are, remote or in person. This team will be a really strong pillar in implementing the strategies outlined in the Community Parenting Saturation Grant. Next team is Coaching and Supporting. Their vision is everyone who interacts with a young child, they should have the skills and knowledge to help them to be ready to learn. Some of the questions that reflective questions that they ask want to ensure is that all those who interact with children have strong skills and knowledge to do so. And that could be a provider, it could be the dentist's office. We want them all to have strong skills, the knowledge to do so, to be trauma-informed, culturally humble and competent, and aware of how a child's brain and bodies work and grow. And they will be a defining pillar in the grant work as well. Last but not least is family-friendly neighborhoods. Their vision is that our neighborhoods should be places where families grow and succeed. No matter what side of town you're on, the neighborhood that you live in, should be where you're most connected. So they want to make sure that neighborhoods are more connected and empowered, so that families and the children in them thrive and are ready to learn. Looking ahead and what's coming in the next couple of years, especially specifically with the grant. As I stated earlier, the Community Parenting Saturation Grant will accelerate and increase our partnerships, our connections to grow, and our community capacity to improve kindergarten readiness. The idea behind the grant is to saturate our community with early childhood tiered supports and resources, and test how that leads to measurable changes in parenting beliefs, skills, and how that leads to improved outcomes for kindergartners. In order to do that, we all must be speaking the same common language around early childhood and use the same effective tools. These tools, which were identified by our grant funders, we deemed to enable this to happen. so that we can improve literacy, social and emotional competencies, family and child connections, and a child's overall readiness to learn. Then a multi-tiered strategy will improve our community cohesion and interdependency and reduce isolation and instability, especially now in COVID-19. Build a more robust early childhood ecosystem, because the work that we're trying to do is all about systems change. Build strong enrollment, equity, quality, and collaboration with the necessary resources to succeed. These are the strategies that we chose for the grant, Tier 1 through Tier 3. And in the grant RFP, we were provided a list of Tier 1 to Tier 3 early childhood interventions. So we had to select these strategies. In Tier 1 and Tier 3, it represents a level of the reach, low to high. So a survey was sent to our volunteers on our 5 teams that represent organizations and residents from our community. And they helped us to identify, and they voted on which strategies that we should implement. And through that approach, we learned that we needed interventions in all 3 strategies, in all 3 tiers. So we saw this opportunity for an ongoing innovation of all of our key stakeholders and integration of strategies to support ongoing referrals to and the retention of families participating in Tier 3 supports like home visiting, preschool, early intervention, and Head Start. So the first strategies are beginning with Babel and Boston Basics. Rockford is a diverse community, with over 70 languages represented just in the Rockford Public Schools alone. The Basics offers collateral materials in multiple languages. It has a well-designed website that can be adapted for any community, and it has a proven implementation plan. A neighborhood city nearby, DeKalb, they have implemented this within their community with great success. Also Aurora as well. So we definitely want to make sure that we're benchmarking with them. There are features that would support the successful outreach and integration across our communities for families of young children. Beginning of Babel is a mobile app for parents and caregivers with children from birth to 4. It has the potential to reach multilingual families as well through their using their smartphones. And then also, beginning with Babel app was also the top voted strategy amongst our volunteers, and it generated the most excitement from our Tier 3 providers. The Tier 3 programs reported back that the mobile app would provide an additional layer of support to families that especially been impacted by COVID-19 and help to reduce isolation. For Tier 2 strategies, our Rock Public Schools early childhood program had already been successful in implementing opening doors since 2012. This evidence-based program has been one of the most successful parent engagement opportunities offered by the school district's early childhood program, and the successful implementation supported the collaboration's decision to expand the opportunity throughout their community. So this is one of those scale-up tactics that we want to do. Our intended outcomes are to build our bench of early learning advocates across all of our neighborhoods to provide social connections and support the families of parents with young children community-wide. Credible Years is a nationwide, amongst its peers, it's been recognized nationwide, and it's a holistic approach and provides training for parents, children, and teachers as well. And with Incredible Years, the goal is to prevent and treat young children's behavior problems and promote their social, emotional, and academic competence. The program is used worldwide in schools and mental health centers, and have been shown to work across different cultures and social economic groups. Our partner providers were very excited about this as well, because it was something that it could be a community program that's shared across our entire community, and really would meet the needs of our children. The components of this program will be able to spread wide and fast. The provided materials and trainings are not complex and could be implemented by a wide variety of organizations. For the Tier 3 strategies, our community already employs multiple Tier 3 strategies: home visiting, early intervention, preschool for all, Head Start. before COVID-19, these programs had more capacity than enrollment. The EDI indicated, though, that while these interventions were highly effective, they did not saturate all of our neighborhoods. And I'm sure, as you're aware, all of these programs have been dramatically impacted by COVID-19, and they have moved to virtual visits, limited class sizes, and made other modifications. So rebuilding these programs while doing effective outreach and recruitment is critical, especially in under-enrolled neighborhoods. Really, this information is being based upon the EDI. We'll integrate our Tier 1 and Tier 2 strategies by sharing these tools with all of the families currently enrolled in the home visiting, all those Tier 3 strategies that you see listed there. And we will also encourage families who use the Tier 1 and Tier 2 to enroll in them as well going forward. And at the end of all of this, at the end of the goal for the grant, we want to ensure that we are engaging hopefully over 2,000 families in the next two and a half years. So it's a lot, but we think we could do it with the work of the team. Once again, I just want to say thank you for your time, thank you for your advice, thank you for your funding, and thank you for your talent and those who have volunteered over the course of the few years. Really appreciate that. Questions?
Thank you so much, Anisha. And I just want to mention, the EDI is meant to be given every 3 years so that you can take a long-term look at, how prepared children are in kindergarten. And so we are preparing now for a second wave of the EDI, which would be administered in January of 2022. And when you think about all that's happened in the lives of young children since the last time we administered it, I think it's going to be a pretty incredible data point for us as we continue to try and pinpoint those resources. I will say, though, as well, that part of the academic return on investment process is to identify your challenges. One of our greatest challenges as a team has been engaging resident and parent voices in a truly authentic way. And that is the support that we're getting through the Community Saturation Grant. Our goals are exactly that. It's engaging authentically parent voices and making them co-designers with us. That's the part of the grant. That's what part of kind of enticed us for the opportunity. So we're engaged in that work right now. That has been one of our greatest challenges. Thank you.
Comments or questions from the board? Mr. Siegel?
Just wanted to let you know that this and item B, the intergovernmental agreement, will be coming back next week for a the IGA will be coming back for vote. Moving on. We have a listening bureau update. We had a couple of interesting events since the last time we met. First one was a meeting that we had with the REA and with Mr. Zedeker and a couple of representatives from the Human Resources Department. In that meeting, we discussed the fact that we needing to put forth a greater effort in recruiting minority teachers. You probably saw on the agenda that we have a board policy that addresses this. And I think we'll have some discussion about that in a few moments. There was a definite agreement that a greater effort, and which obviously is translating to a greater number of dollars, will need to be committed to finding teachers who better represent the diversity of the student population and of our community. Had discussions in the past about what hasn't worked and why. Zedeker and the Human Resources team are definitely looking at some new strategies to increase the marketing efforts of bringing in a much more diverse teaching workforce. We'll have another meeting, and I will report back what that says. But for the time being, it is encouraging that we do have the recognition that this greater effort needs to be made, and we have people who are designing those efforts in concert with the REA. So I think that that's going to be helpful to have their energy involved also. We also had a student listening session on December 15th. We had students from Auburn, East, and Guilford. They were given time and space to able to put voice to their concerns about the equity picture looks like from a student seat, which I think is going to be very valuable for us to continue to listen to that, gather as many of those perspectives as we can, so we can make really well-informed efforts in addressing the concerns that these students have. Following the meeting, we discussed that so many of the comments are not new. In fact, they come up consistently year after year, and our partner at National Equity Project said these are not new to Rockford Public Schools, and this is the concerns that they were bringing up, common concerns, and probably should be concerned that these concerns don't go away or don't seem to be getting much better. Really indicating that we haven't listened effectively. I think that's a reality, but felt like it was a good beginning session, and I'm looking forward to more of these listening sessions with the students and working with the National Equity Project to address their concerns. Today had a meeting with our lobbyist group, McGuire Woods, Michael Cassidy and Amy Ballinger Cole, Dr. Jarrett and Mr. Earl Dotson Jr. and I had a meeting with our new local state representative, Dave Bella, which is kind of exciting. We haven't had a lot of face-to-face contact from the board to our local representation, and it was exciting to get to meet Mr. Bella and help him get launched on his efforts to represent us down in Springfield. And I was pleased to see that he had done quite a bit of homework on what evidence-based funding is. In fact, he said his first two assignments really were to seek out the Education Committee and the Appropriations Committee. It seemed like those were really great places to start, and probably the two places I would have encouraged him to start. Thought that was good. I think we can look forward to a pretty healthy partnership. He did say straight away that he was 110% supportive of the evidence-based funding and will do whatever work he can to keep that going and grow it. Also had a fairly robust discussion about the possibility of working with community partners to still take advantage of the Barbara Coleman campus or other facilities in the area to develop a more robust vo-tech environment in the community, and I think that gives us some pretty great opportunities. If Dr. Jarrett or Mr. Earl Dotson Jr. would like to add anything from the meeting, yes, I covered it. And I guess as far as the preview of consent items,
just wanted to say regarding the student meeting with those African American students, I just wanted to and thank you, David Siegel, for both being a part of that. I really appreciate it's there, and hopefully that next meeting you can attend as well. But I hope you've been interesting and helpful, so I just want to say thank you.
Consent agenda preview is we will have the intergovernmental agreement with the city of Rockford. 5.0 program at Auburn and a geo-policing site for special education transition and vocational program.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Siegel? Thank you. We'll move on now to Mrs. McCulloch, who will lead the Performance and Monitoring Committee portion of our meeting. Mrs. McCulloch.
Hi, good evening, and thank you, David. Nice job. So the following items are proposed changes to the board policies, and they come from both Human Resources and Legal. And Mr. Zediger and Ms. Holy are here to answer any questions you might have. The first one that we're going to look at is Board Policy 5.10, which is General Personnel Equal Employment Opportunity Minority Recruitment. And the main change in this is that the victims of gender violence are added as a category of people requiring equal employment opportunity. It also updates the contact information for our non-desegregation officer, which is Mr. Zediger, as well as our complaint manager, which is Dr. Jarrett. The next policy to be updated is 5.30, which is about hiring process and criteria. This policy, the update, prohibits us meaning the district, from asking applicants about their salary history, and it prohibits the district from factoring salary history into the compensation or hiring decisions. The revisions now require that the district review and consider as a condition of an employment any indicated finding of abuse or neglect issued by DCFS. And finally, it gives the board the right to authorize employment-related background inquiries, and such as anything beyond a fingerprint-based criminal history records check when it deems appropriate to do so, and that would have to be in accordance with the applicable laws. Updates for Board Policy 5.40 are about general personnel also, but it's communicable and chronic infectious disease. So this hasn't been updated since 1997, when it was written primarily or focused totally on it. Let me give you the previous header: management of employees with acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, AIDS/human immunodeficiency virus, HIV. And so the whole policy was about a specific syndrome, and so it's been updated to a single paragraph, especially as you consider COVID and the other things that have come along. A single paragraph that says the superintendent or designee shall develop and implement procedures for managing known or suspected cases of communicable and chronic infectious disease involving district employees that are consistent with state and federal law, Illinois Department of Public Health rules, and school board policies. So the previous one was like 2 pages long, and we're down to a paragraph. The last policy, and I should say the district, of course, complies with the Americans with Disabilities Act for communicable and chronic disease as part of that update. All right, the last one is Board Policy 5.80, and it's on court duties. Court meaning when our employees are have to be in court as for whatever means. And our current policy does not, although it includes our bargaining units, at this time it does not include nutrition services or hearing interpreters. So those two are added because how we handle their time in court is outlined in their contracts. And there is some rewording of the coverage for staff who are not covered by any of those agreements. And it basically says that if they're on the work of the district, they will be paid for their time completely, and if they're there on personal business, that they will not, but can use personal time. All of those board policy changes come back for a vote on the 12th next week. Does anybody have any questions on the policies?
Mr. Rollins.
On 5.10, I guess my only question is, so we're inserting actual email addresses in here, and required? Because, I mean, what's odd to me about that is that means that if there's a change in personnel, phone numbers never change. I mean, if there's a change in staff, the phone number is going to be the same, but the email addresses are personal, so if anybody changes, that means we have to change the board policy. Really required?
So I asked Ms. Holdley that question, and she said yes.
It's required.
I answer?
May.
Yes, and in fact, we had a lengthy discussion with the department manager when we had a Title IX complaint that they overruled us and indicated that yes, under the Uniform Grievance and Title IX, we were required to include the individual's email addresses as well as contact information. And so we weren't required to include Aaron or Matt's home address.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, just Mr. Rollins, right? Okay, all right.
All right, thanks.
Siegel, you have a
Okay.
question?
Do at the policy goals.
Policy or your...
I'm sorry.
What number?
Yeah, 5.1. So it's the second page. It's goals. It goes through the different categories of employee, but I'm just going to use administrative employees. It says among its administrative employees, including both managerial and non-managerial employees, as well as building principals, the district's goals in this category are for a percent equal to the available qualified workforce in Boone-Winnebago County, as established by the Illinois Department of Labor. We actually track that year over year to see how close we're getting that trick. You know how far we are from it. Are we above it? Are we below it?
Worker's on his way up.
Right.
Oh, there we go. The goals that have been established the last couple of years have not revolved around that particular goal within board policy. That is one we have to continue to refer to. But what we have analyzed is available and what we look at statewide data, new data that's coming out for certified staff that during our shortage, both from administrative and teacher. And so that's the data that we have been looking at to gauge ourselves in terms of available qualified candidates. But that is in board policy to take a look at regional availability and numbers, so we'll have to continue to monitor that as well.
You give an indication as to how close or how far away we are from it?
I would have to look that up, and I could get back to you on that.
I think it'd be interesting to know, and I guess it would also be interesting to know or see, and maybe you have sent this out, and if you have, I'm sorry that I overlooked it, what the goals really are that we are trying to work on. As I was reading this, I was thinking, well, maybe our goal should be to track above what the regional numbers are, actually be creating and expanding the available qualified workforce in each of the demographics. Not just trying to match it, but actually to expand it. As one of the largest employers in the region, it seems like that would be one of our responsibilities and one of our opportunities.
Sure.
So David, to clarify, what you'd like to see is the regional numbers for qualified certified staff. Is that the number you're looking for?
For each of the categories within that goals section on page 2 of policy 5.1, be able to see how are we doing in attracting the available qualified personnel within each of those work segments and the demographic segments.
So my question to you is, how do you determine what is a qualified
That's a great question too.
paraprofessional? What is it? I mean, well, now you can do that, but qualified clerical or qualified in some of the other categories. I can see that it would be that they could tweak out that information for the region for a certified staff because they have to be licensed, right? So you can look at the state licensures and addresses and figure that out, or maybe the regional office has those their names on file. But how do you do that? I mean, administrative employees, many are academic positions, our deans of curriculum and the like, but what about all our finance people? What about our HR people? How do we determine what the qualified pool is?
Yeah, I guess I took Mr. Siegel's request in terms of certified staff because that's data that would be available to us to measure against hiring, where we do put an emphasis on our certified staff. Certainly we want to shoot for a diverse workforce in all areas of the organization, but certainly our focus has been around certified staff. I would have to dive in to figure out how I might be able to look at, to Mr. McCulloch's point, clerical staff, et cetera, but I certainly could pull regional data around certified, available certified staff.
I think that would be a really great start, and I think would be the priority information to get in regards to certified staff. But I think it would also be very interesting, and it would also be kind of cool if that were, I don't know, part of the graphic portion of the CAFR that we see each year. Because I think that as we try to attract that more diverse workforce, it's going to become a significant budget line item. And as a fairly loyal reader of the CAFR, it would be a great way for me to be able to track how we're doing in that particular.
And I can give an update to the board. I am pulling new numbers in terms of breakdown of diversity amongst our different groups that I've shared with our partner, Eliminate Racism 815. And so when completing that report, I can share with the board as well for some of those updated numbers.
Comments or questions? Okay, Mrs. McCulloch, you've got a couple things left on your agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Zediker. I think that that's a great place to start with both of those items coming back to the board. So we have a Tier 2 PDSA update on the system-wide framework. And Heidi, or Mrs. Detman, and I went over this a few times, and I said, you know what? You've got the language, you're the pro, and I am still learning. And so I've asked her to step up and go through the slide deck because some of this will be a repeat for some of us. Some of this will be brand new for some of us. And I think that a review is totally necessary as I speak to other members of the administration who say they're still learning and digging in. So to really understand what system-wide framework means, that was where I started, and how all the pieces come together. So they're going to try to tie together ideas for your consideration and hopefully our discussion on the equity imperative. There you go, David. Our work in academic return on investment and the design of the system-wide framework. And we're going to focus on the standards portion of that framework. So with that introduction, I'd like to give the floor back to Mrs. Detman.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to try and be very judicious with the time that I spend on going through the content so that there's plenty of time for discussion and questions on some of these concepts. So you have a very long slide deck in front of you. I will not be going through the timeline portion of the slides at the very end. So I'm going to put the majority of my focus around the first portion of the slide deck. We're slightly off, aren't we? It's pretty close. So I'm going to start with kind of grounding us in our equity imperative, which then leads to our equity challenge, which Mr. Siegel kind of will be reporting back on more frequently as a part of our equity systems team. There we go. And so I want to make sure that I pause on this slide in particular, because this really is our North Star when we're talking about narrowing our focus and we're talking about identifying priorities. The equity imperative is what should be guiding that work. So I'm going to read it verbatim here. To create learning environments that work for all of our students and interrupt the predictability of outcomes based on zip code. This is not a new concept. When Dr. Jarrett launched the school scorecard, he did so with this visual. And in the original slide deck prior to this visual, there was one with some red and some yellow circles, and that was our reality. And our goal is to get to this, where we have green and blue schools, or schools that are serving students well, and that are truly in the business of interrupting predictability based on zip code. And so we have kind of taken that in, and as an administrative team, done some really deep learning, realignment of priorities, and this is captured in a few different partnerships. First and foremost, our partnership with the National Equity Project that you've been receiving regular updates on. Secondly, our partnership with the District Management Group, who truly came in and taught us academic return on investment. So I'm going to talk about kind of getting us toward that equity imperative and the goals there, and what's here on this map in two levels. And the first is at the program and initiative level. And that's where the concept of the academic return on investment lives. It's abbreviated AROI, which is very difficult to say, and so I will just call it academic return on investment. But there are really three core questions for academic return on investment, and that is what works, for whom, and at what cost. We can recognize that in a district our size, it is very easy and sometimes tempting to go a mile wide and an inch deep with initiatives. We know that that does not yield significant outcomes or a change in result for students. And so we get frustrated with the continual problems, and we're not alone in these problems. And the temptation then is to continue to add new initiatives to solve those ongoing problems. This leads to frustration in the schools, and sometimes, and we've learned lots of lessons from this on a national level, we get into that push-pull between compliance versus quality. Well, just because we add more items to check doesn't necessarily increase the quality of the experience for students and families, and therefore reach our goal of interrupting the predictability of student outcomes based on zip code. And so we have this captured in our goal, Goal 1, Growth and Achievement. We have a very large budget, but we have limited time, we have limited resources. And so the challenge before us is to focus our time on what matters most. So again, in this portion of the presentation, we're at the program and initiative level. And that leads us, I apologize for the way this is laid out here. That leads us then to the three core components of the academic return on investment framework. The first is student outcomes. So that's analyzing achievement. We've been very laser focused on student achievement over the past several years. What does that mean? It's mastery of student learning outcomes and our growth over time. The second is the student segments. In this particular part, we're not necessarily looking at student demographics. We're actually looking at specific actionable grouping of students. And I'll give some examples of that later on in the presentation. And then the third part of the puzzle here is the fully loaded cost. Not just the cost of the contract that comes before you for approval, but the investment of time, of resources, of human resources, all of that, professional development, etc. So we call these the fully loaded costs. Now, we could argue the merit of everything that we do in our efforts toward increasing student achievement and that equity imperative. But that is not possible for a district of our size to go that deep into everything that we do. And so we have to set priorities. And that's where our 3 tiers of AROI or PDSAs come in. Tier 1, you don't see very much. You get that and kind of a preview of the consent in these meetings. Those are managed at the department level. And what I mean by that is that academic return on investment mindset is happening between the contract initiator or the program initiator and their supervisor. So every year, on an annual basis, they're reviewing their goals, their outcomes, and making a recommendation to their budget manager for a reinvestment of those dollars. We look at those at the cabinet level, very similar to what you do on your consent agenda at the board meetings. It comes before you, and there's an error on this slide, I apologize, we had an update, for contracts over $25,000. Okay, so that's tier 1. Tier 2 is our next level, and that's where we've started to kind of narrow the funnel a little bit. And we've got 15 to 20 high leverage initiatives. These were selected through a process at both cabinet and board meetings to get to what do we need to have more eyes on, more visibility, what are some possible future tier 3s, and what has an increased scope across our district. This has more frequent reporting, more attention, more of our resources devoted to it than tier 1. The final level is tier 3. These were selected by the board, finalized by the board. They're identified as having a potential significant impact on student learning across multiple departments, and the dollar amount is really high. This year, our current academic return on investment studies for tier 3 are the Freshman Academy model, Reading Horizons, and Behavior Intervention Specialists. As just a friendly reminder, there are 10 steps in the AROI process. They're divided into 4 buckets: plan, design analysis, evaluate, and then act. Number 10, act, is really important, and I want us to hold on to that concept through the rest of the presentation. These are the options in a PDSA: eliminate, fix, expand, keep, segment and focus, or reduce. And so it's based on the data, based on what we learn, and evaluating the program effectiveness, the cost effectiveness, and what insight we draw from that to answer those questions: what works, for whom, and at what cost. And if the answer to that is it's not working for anybody, then we should be very willing to walk away, because there's no point in continuing to invest the time and the money and the effort into something that's not making a difference for kids. So that's why we have that kind of tier 1, lower level, important, but we have to set priorities. Tier 2, 15 to 20, higher visibility with the board. Tier 3, an extensive and intensive review of some high leverage strategies. So that's what we're doing at the program and initiative level. But what we've learned about academic return on investment is that it is so much more than this 10-step process. It's a mindset, and we had to be asking ourselves constantly, what's working, for whom, and at what cost? Sometimes that cost is financial, as in the AROI studies. Sometimes that cost is opportunity and long-term outcomes for students. And so as we move into this mindset of what's working, for whom, and at what cost, we need to be applying that to our school and district level improvement efforts as well. And again, that North Star is interrupting the predictability of student outcomes by zip code. But when you were first introduced to that concept, it was only a scorecard. It was a report on student outcomes. And what we've learned in our work both with National Equity Project, with District Management Group, in our administration's research and school performance frameworks, is that the school scorecard is not enough. It needs to be supported by a more robust system-wide framework for improvement. And so there are, sorry again, there are four key components that have to work together in order for us to get at the goals of our North Star. In the center, accountability, that's where the board's action and the board's decisions primarily live. Now, in the academic return on investment slide, I went through the options, right? Fix, expand, segment and focus, keep, etc. This part here is where the board asks, what will we do at the end? What action will we take if schools in a 3, 4, and 5-year track make downward movement? And I'm going to review what those tracks are and how we get there in just a moment. But that's the board's kind of ultimate return on investment action, is what action are we going to take in step 10, and what are our options? And right now we don't have those laid out. That's our ongoing work this year, in year 1 of our rollout. The second portion of this diagram is the quality. Now, for us in our district, we're defining this as the quality peer review process. We have had a lot of success, culturally with the quality peer review. It gives great opportunities for schools to kind of throw open their doors, staff from various schools to mix, visit each other, see something new, and grow. But what we have been missing is that opportunity to really ask some questions about the conditions in the school that make success possible for students. And an important question to ask is, where does the motivation for improvement come from for the staff in a school? And how do we know what needs to be improved? Well, no one is better prepared to talk about that than the students who are experiencing the learning in that school. What do they say? What do their parents and caregivers say? What feedback do they have for school leadership on what needs to improve from their perspective? So the quality portion of this is embedded within this Venn diagram, but it is removed from accountability. This is truly about learning about our school, our environment, our children, and what we need to do to improve their learning experience. Because if we do that, then our accountability measures, our lead and lags, are going to move. The next part is the part you're more familiar with, or most familiar with, and that's the school scorecard. And this is really our measurement system for our priorities. There are lots of different, adaptations that we can make as we learn about how these measures work. Right now, we're in a very strange time with COVID-19, where assessments are pretty unpredictable. They used to be pretty steady Eddie, and that's not where we are right now. So we have some important decisions to make about how we're going to adjust to that at a time when we're kind of desiring high accountability, but where it's simply not possible during a global pandemic. So how are we going to respond as a district to those demands? Where I'm going to put my focus primarily tonight, because this is the part that's been the hardest to picture and imagine because it's something we've never done before, is in the area that we're calling standards. And this is where I'm going to slow down a little bit. The goal of our standards part of the Venn diagram is pairing support with practice. This is really kind of symbiosis and mutual accountability. This is that kind of we rise and fall together portion of our framework. On the left side of this, you see the standards of service. That's our central office responsibility. What is it that each of our departments is responsible for doing in service to schools to support their success? On the right side is the standard of practice. As a result, then, what are principals and teachers and other support personnel responsible for enacting within the school? These lists are meant to be parallel and created to support common goals. Our common goal here, again, is our equity imperative, our North Star, to interrupt the predictability of student outcomes based on their zip code. Now, we have a challenge. This is brand new. Where does it live? Who keeps this running? We're still finding the right home for this in the organization, but we're building it across multiple departments. So I want to give you a couple examples of what this might look like. So what you have here on slide 24 is one little kind of nugget from a early draft of special education. This is just to show an example of a standard of practice paired with the standard of service. So in this example, the standard of practice is that all school staff working in self-contained programs are certified in CPI. CPI stands for Crisis Prevention Intervention. Okay, so that's what the school is expected to do, ensure that everyone is certified. A corresponding standard of practice would be that our central office maintains a district-wide train-the-trainer model that includes CPI. Okay, so that's just a very practical, tangible example. Where things get a little harder to kind of picture in our imagination is, what does this look like for a curriculum, or for a department like curriculum, for example? And so I've put in some early thinking here as a draft, as an illustration for you. And once we get through the end, I'm actually going to tell you how just since I submitted this presentation, our thinking has already changed slightly and been refined. So we're very much building this in the present tense. In our standards of service and standards of practice, there will be a particular format that every department who's included will follow. And so the purple arrow here draws you to that. In this particular example for the curriculum department, you can see there's a description of services, key measures of success, and their service categories. We're not going to get too deep into the right side of this because everything is draft form. The next slide shows one level deeper. Okay, within each of those service categories, describe that, identify your supporting partners, and then support any sort of additional documentation for that checklist item. In identifying the supporting departments, we're also breaking down silos. We're getting really clear on what we're trying to accomplish and who the partners are in supporting schools to be successful. Now here's where the kind of meat and potatoes of this really is. You can see on slide 28, I'm going to begin with the standards of practice checklist. And I'm going to walk you through this, and then I'm going to share what our thinking has changed. The standards of practice checklist. This is for high school only. This is for curriculum. Our data tells us that math is our greatest area of need, all the way through, from elementary through high school. And so we know that in order to be successful as we launch standards of practice, we absolutely cannot expect to measure every single thing that we wish to see or that we hope to see. We have to get very narrow, we have to get very strategic, and it has to be doable. Otherwise, we will have wasted time, effort, and energy, and we will not have followed our own rules of getting focused as a part of academic return on investment. So we have narrowed this down to 5 items for curriculum for high school. And actually, I think we're going to be able to narrow it down to 3. And if you look, number 1 is to ensure that we're giving at least 95%, that's the accepted testing threshold of our focus skilled assessments in every grade level and content area, have been administered, scored, and recorded informative. That is something that we can quickly gather data on. Numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5 all have to do with integrated math. Across the chart, you can see, where did this come from? Is this a policy? Is it federal, state, district, or department? So that we can see kind of the genesis of it. And then there's a scale rating on the right-hand side of their compliance, 0 to 4. These are all things that need to be easy to be measured and will truly be indicators of whether or not we are implementing integrated math. So we can talk a little bit about what those items are in our discussion, but overall, in this mock example, these numbers are not real, the total score is 2.6. Well, this is the school's self-evaluation, and they rated themselves as 2.6. On the next slide, 29, there is a corresponding evaluation, which would be from the curriculum department themselves. And they differ in the highlighted area, resulting in a score of 2.4. So what do we do with that? The school needs to be able to assess themselves, the central office needs to be able to provide that assessment, and both of them matter and have equal weight. If you look on slide 30, this is a breakdown of our proposed scoring. Along the category side, you can see some mock departments. We've not landed on this. This is all for the sake of illustration. You can see year one, the department evaluation, and the school self-evaluation. You can follow that math all the way down to the end. Each of them is equally weighted at 50%, and we land on a total adjusted score of 2.11. If you follow that down even further, you can see the establishment of the accountability baseline and review track. So we have our scorecard, which is quality instruction and climate and culture. Those are those metrics that we've been kind of finalizing over the last couple of years. And that's 50%. And then the standards of practice, which would be curriculum plus additional departments that our rally cry team lands on, weighted at 50%. That would then put schools into a 3, a 4, or a 5-year track. So we have half the points coming from the scorecard, half the points coming from the standards of practice checklist. And here's where what we choose to measure really matters. They should be lead indicators for the lag measures on our scorecard. They should be directly related to our North Star. They should help us focus our time, our energy, our resources, our funding on the things that we believe will move the needle the most for students. These are the compliance portion of our framework. That allows the quality peer review to be deeper into the environment of the school, their beliefs about improvement, their beliefs about students, what they're learning about the student experience. And so that becomes a supporting mechanism to move some of these measures. You have seen these slides before, and I'm going to wrap myself up here in just a moment. But as a reminder, the proposal is to put schools into a 3, a 4, or a 5-year track. In the 3-year track, that would be an indicator of low scorecard and low standards of practice performance. That means that we're seeing some difficulty implementing the expected required elements and a difficulty in student results. What that means is that all district supports that we identify through this process are required for this school. They have a tight turnaround of 3 years, and as the board, you're asking the question, what action will we take if at the end of this study, or even in between, as we look at year-over-year growth and improvement, or lack of, our answers to what's working for whom and at what cost are not what's good for kids. The 4-year track, again, shows kind of that yellow into green, and all district supports are required. A school that has high standards of practice and high results for students has optional district supports that they can opt into. The quality peer review is a tool for all schools in all tracks, but we prioritize our 3- and 4-year schools first because they need the deepest dive to help set priorities for themselves within this framework. The remainder of these slides you have seen before, and you have them available in your packet, so I'm not going to spend time there. If it's all right with you, Ms. McCulloch, I'd just kind of like to open the floor to discussion at this point. Dr. Jarrett, did you want to follow up with anything?
Well, I think it's time to dive into discussion. Thank you, Mrs. Dunman.
I have one question, and I don't know that there's a real good answer for it, but reviews, in my mind, are internal. They're, elementary school has their RPS elementary teachers that come in and do the peer review. Is there such a thing as an external review where you could bring in a team of people from either an accrediting agency or a high-performing school district similar to our size or whatever that would come in and give an outside view of our review.
Far, we have an internal peer review process, but I think we can bring that that idea of an external concept to our group. There's nothing that has been finalized in our development, and that certainly is a best practice that is used in education world as well as other professional worlds.
Rounds.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to articulate some of the same concerns that I've been articulating. So we're weighting 50% on standards and 50% based on performance, on actual assessment. And so my concern is what's leading indicators versus lagging indicators, as Mrs. Detman mentioned. I guess I've got two concerns about that. One is, what if we have the wrong leading indicators? But also, reading through these, I always get the sense there's a certain amount of sort of a check the box money. And so we could have the right leading indicators, but people have ways of making sure they can check all the right boxes. So I think what I'm saying is, I've got a concern where we could have schools that seem to have very high standards of practice scores, yet continue to have low assessment scores. That ought to tell us something if that happens. And I think that's something that we should be watching for. And I don't know that we should, if we see that, I think something needs to be adjusted. Either to recognize that we've got the wrong leading indicators, or we have to recognize that we've made it too easy for people to check the box.
So I really appreciate that comment, and this is something that we, obviously talk about all the time. I'd like to point you to slide 29. Okay, I mentioned this and I didn't go back to it. We had 4 indicators there for integrated math. 2 of them are about completing professional training. Well, that feels kind of check the boxy, doesn't it? And so the question is, well, why is it important for them to have completed the training? The training is important so that we can get at numbers 4 and 5, which is the instructional shift and the spiraling of content in the assessment. We actually don't need to measure 2 and 3. We need to measure 4 and 5. 2 and 3 are the expectation for professional learning. 4 and 5 are not things that can be observed once or put in a binder. These are active audits of instruction and assessment practices. And those are the things that matter most. So in our review, as we're asking ourselves these questions, because we don't want that compliance checklist, as we're asking ourselves these questions, we say we can actually eliminate 2 and 3 and get this down to just items 4 and 5. And that helps focus as well.
I assume 5 means something to you, because I gotta admit, it doesn't
does.
mean anything at all to me.
No, it probably doesn't. And if you'd like, I could try and sum it up in one sentence,
Nope,
but I
that's
don't
fine.
need to.
As long as it means something to you,
It
and as long
does.
as it means
Yes.
something to the people who are measured, and they being measured, and they know what.
And Mr.
what it
Reynolds,
is.
a couple things I'd like to interject, and I think Ms. Detman provided a great example. We literally had this conversation 5 hours ago. Both of your points were conversation topics today. And bottom line, 50-50 is thrown out there now just for a basis of conversation. Really, the board is going to have to make that final decision. From my perspective, an accountability decision of whether that's 80-20 or 20-80 or 50-50 really needs to come from the board. Number 2, Mrs. Detman already articulated, this is very, very preliminary, and we've got some work to do. Our goal is ultimately not to have more than 10 total that we're dealing with. This has got to fit on a page, but yet these have to be things that matter enough and get really significant feedback from principals on that they believe are leading indicators and that they believe will matter, that we ultimately believe as a district and the board believes will matter. And then third, you're absolutely right. We are going to have to, over time, then study this. And if we have a consistent pattern of schools that are getting close to a 4 on standards of practice and are not moving their scorecard on the lagging indicators, and that is staying stagnant, then we will have to then make adjustments to the leading indicators, because ultimately this is about moving the lag. So all 3 of those points I think are really important, and we're going to keep coming back to you with more and more development around this, and I believe the next time we bring it forward, we'll have a much better developed draft for you to look at. But in terms of the percentages, purely a placeholder. I think that's where we started our thinking. It seemed like a good neutral place to put it, but we're going to be very open to where you think it should land.
Just in terms of like system cohesion, we should be asking ourselves together as the administration and the board, do our tier 2 PDSA items fully align with what we're trying to accomplish through the standards of practice and the scorecard? Because that we should all be focused on those things that matter most. And so as we continue to develop and learn and refine, it's going to be looking at our academic return on investment system as a whole, as it supports schools in their pursuit of that North Star.
Mr. Cummings?
Anybody else? Yeah.
First of all, and I hope I didn't miss this one, but when you have the 3 tiers of the costing, have you aligned so that there's an actual cost or budget-based report that will support that so we can see what those dollars are for tier 1, 2, and 3?
Actually, as we approach our budget season, you're going to start to see department by department, tier 1 and tier 2, but you'll also get a high-level report of the tier 1 and tier 2 initiatives with the total cost associated.
Okay, so as a methodology, we're going to attach to the various line items exactly tier 1, 2, 3. So, and I don't know how possible that is across the board, but I'm assuming that there's some structure so we can at least see, from my point of view at a macro level, sort of the percentages that represent those.
You're going to see it, as Mrs. Detman said, in the budget process and department budgeting when we do the parts before sharing the whole.
Yeah.
And that's going to be starting as early as next month, I believe, February Committee of the Whole. And really, it's actually going to be easier to work backwards for the board. We basically said everything is tier 1, with the exception of the things that qualify for tier 2 and tier 3. So that will make it a little more manageable rather than, and so really we're saying there are going to be certain things we're going to prioritize, and we had a lot of conversations about this last year as a board, about the hyper focus on our tier 3, which are going to get the full treatment. And you've had reports on virtually all of the tier 2s already this year. That's what we did first in our board reporting, and it's been 5 to 7 of them, I can't remember the final number we settled on, but it was right around 6 or 7, I think, have come to you already in committee reports. We had one tonight, for example, that within tier 2, and also the tier 3s, and the rest of the tier 2s you're getting in that weekly update that Mary Call and I collaborate to write with different staff members. So, must-read material. We hope to make Board Member Siegel a dedicated reader to that, just like the CAFR.
And I'll just add that we have an opportunity every year, January, February timing, to make level adjustments. So everything starts as tier 1, but in our annual review could say, well, actually this is so critical and aligned to our work that it needs to be a tier 2. Or something from tier 2 needs to come down to a tier 1 because we do have a cap of 20 items for tier 2. So we have decisions that we have to make together, and that will all come through as a part of the budgeting process. So we'll start to have this annual cadence of making those adjustments.
Yeah. I would assume this is part of the whole AROI mindset, so that we would see the summarizations. My second question is around, if you look at slide 30, which we've talked about a lot, have you gone through specific schools to sort of do a pilot on this, even if it were just amongst yourselves, or have you applied this to schools?
That's coming up. We have 5 schools that we'd like to work with at various levels, and including special programs to kind of beta test, get their feedback, and see how this works when we actually implement a measure.
So it's interesting you should say it in those words. Will it be fundamentally broken down by program, since I assume that there's a number of schools, and I'll pick on Rolling Green, which really has a very high special ed part and regular ed. And my point would be that, you know, it's one school, but it really has those. And I know it's good enough that we have it by school, so I'm not knocking it at all, but I'm just, since you really kind of stated one of the things that I had a question about, we'll see it at a program level. And again, poor Auburn always is the poster child for this, because they've got a number of really large programs. So I would think that this would be something that, and I really hate to say things that might cause you more work, but when I read through this, I mean, that's one of the things that struck me, is that it might truly be very different. And as an FYI, if you look at costing, and I know that's way too much detail at this point, but at some point, because I think some of the questions that I've heard on the board over the last bazillion years, is that there have been some questions about some of the overall programs, or their success, I should say. And I would think that we would have a bit more hard data using this approach, that at some point it would be, you know, much clearer how we're doing on some of that. So that's why I ask. I think the final thing I'll say is that this is all well thought out. So it truly, I think when I look at the concept of the 3, 4, and 5 year targets or baselines, however you want to think about it, that at some point, obviously early indicators, and that's what I'm hearing, is really what's going to drive a lot of this, because I know you have if negative movement built in, but I would think that that's one of those that, you know, we already know we have some real challenges on some of this, so there's no need to make this, if I can put it this way, over academic, right? We have some things that we really need to address. One of the questions that rose to my mind as I read through this too is, even though we don't control it, is there any kind of sharing with our charter schools on these kinds of approaches or these kinds of concepts, or is this something that we're really just going to do in, if you will, proper
So
RPS?
the charter schools will have the exact same scorecard. What will be different is they get full accountability on their scorecard in 0 standards of practice, because that's the
Right.
trade-off. They get more freedom in exchange for double the accountability, or whatever
Right.
percentage we weigh it in,
Yeah.
what we land on for our schools. But the scorecard will match identically.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, no other comments?
I do.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a couple of questions and maybe quick content. Would you talk about the cost? You said there was when we were looking at ROI, there's both opportunity and long-term outcomes are part of the costs. I just thought you might give examples of those.
So what I meant when I said that is sometimes our cost is straight dollars, and sometimes the cost may be in opportunity because of a lack of achievement. So those long terms cost on a student's outcomes in life in general, rather than just the dollars that were spent.
I would just interject
Okay.
on top of that, Mrs. McCulloch, and that's an excellent point of clarification. Sometimes opportunity means opportunity cost as well, and we have a finite resource of time and focus as a district. And I think one of our greatest shortcomings in the time we've worked together in this district has been the challenge of that opportunity cost issue. There are so many things we want to do. We're such a large district. There's so many things we could potentially focus on for improvement that it's very, very challenging to stay focused on a few really high leverage items. And so one of the things I want the board to hold us accountable for and to be our partners in is making sure that we don't let 15 tier 2s become 50, because we just can't choose. You know, that's the trap here, is opportunity cost, is whether it's the board's time, whether it's the focus of school leadership or teachers. 4 is not better, and there is an opportunity cost when you add complexity and the number of initiatives. And I think, frankly, we've been very guilty of doing too much of that. And part of this work of standards of practice is about editing down, just like our tier system did for our programs. I think editing down what our schools are accountable for in their practices should have a very similar focusing effect. So I think what you just asked for a clarification on is a real essential question there. And that third piece of what are we focusing on, as opposed to spreading that opportunity out to lots of initiatives, is going to be really crucial moving forward.
Well, and then I heard Ms. Stetman talk about adjusting, or, you know, a delta in what the tier 1 and 2s are, for example, because it's that tier 2 list that typically, or in the past, came to the board for conversation and to be whittled down to tier 3. So those changes to tier 1 and 2 are going to happen at an administrative level. Is that correct? It really doesn't come to the board until we're kind of in that tier 2 stage and have that list.
Anytime the board sees an initiative, we will, through the budgeting process and through laying this out, we're going to want the board to be able to weigh in. If there's something that is in tier 1 that the board wants to prioritize, what we're going to ask is, we're going to put limits on the entire organization with your support to make sure that if we start adding some tier 1s and moving them to tier 2, that we find some tier 2s to move back down to tier 1. I think that would be the only trade-off we would ask for, but I think it would be well within the board's purview to find some tier 1s if it better aligns with the work of the district. We think it's something the board should work with our team on an annual basis to review, to make sure we have the right tier 1s, 2s, and 3s.
Well, I don't remember the board spending much time on tier 1. We were looking primarily at tier 2, were we not, this last time around?
Right, but if something comes up that's a new initiative, for example, is probably when it would be more likely, Mrs. McCulloch, to your point, yeah. There are many things in tier 1 that are very expensive, but are things that the board feels comfortable allowing the department to manage. For example, you know, we didn't make the purchase of pizza into a tier 2 initiative, even though it's a multi-million-dollar spend every year. That's a real extreme example. But there are going to be some real gray areas in tier 1 that potentially are potential tier 2s. It'll be I think there will be some gray area at the top of tier 1, at the bottom of tier 2, and between tier 2 and tier 3. We do anticipate the board is going to have some really rigorous discussion, and we'll try to pull some of those tier 1s to your attention to make sure each year we're not burying things that you'd rather spend your time on.
Okay. You spoke, Mrs. Stetman, to the quality peer review, and you talked about parent and student input on that. And I thought parent and student input was on the scorecard, climate and culture, more so than, and I thought the quality peer review was focused on peers, giving feedback to peers. So am I missing something? Maybe I am.
We're in the middle of rethinking our quality peer review and trying to pull in lessons that we're learning from our partnership with the National Equity Project, and the importance of elevating student voice as participants in kind of co-designing a school's efforts at improvement, and for parents as well. So all of that is still very much under consideration right now. We're working as a cross-departmental team to keep pushing our thinking here. And see it as that supporting piece to the whole framework. So I would say we're not quite there yet in terms of a full report on the quality peer review, but we're doing a lot of learning and listening and iterating.
And Mrs. McCulloch, what the board will see is a very rough draft before we move too far on any of these concepts. As you can see, we're really trying to live up to this new model of governance here. instead of you seeing this as a finished product that we've been working on for 6 months, we're showing you, we're updating all 3 of these work streams. This is probably the 4th or 5th time we've already come back to this year, and we are loving that we're getting feedback from the board each step of the way here, so that we don't go too far down the road with our thinking. So the same will be true of the quality peer review, Mrs. McCullough.
Okay. And I understand your concern about not checking the boxes, but those 4 and 5, for example, just on that integrated math piece, can't really happen unless you have the 2 and 3 done, right? If the teachers haven't done the curriculum, if they haven't worked with the coaches. So I think that information is impactful. I don't know that you want to make it part of the score, but I actually do as a board member, because we've had some non-compliance with providing, what do you call them? Ways that we want our instruction to come about, and people have held on to what they've done all along, have not been willing to step up and move forward with some of the initiatives that you've brought forward. So I actually think that's some important information. I mean, it's more, and I understand that you want to limit the number, but I think that maybe the conversation about percentages might be where that becomes more impactful. So, and Mr.
McCullough, I just want to give you a heads up. We're at the 60th minute now for this, so if you could try to wrap it up. I don't want to cut off too short, but go ahead. Just wanted to...
All right, my last point was going to be to Mr. Connor and the rest of the board, and that is we didn't cover the timeline, but if you look at page 3940, it talks about, it doesn't give specific schools, but you know, having 5 schools as part of the year, where is it? It talks about the quality peer review and choosing 5 schools, and without the quality peer review, you can't get the rest of the numbers. So, and it actually says that we would have started that this fall, and I asked Ms. Stetman about that. Are we on track for these calendars that they gave us? And I'll let her answer that to the board, and that's my last comment on this subject.
In brief, mostly yes. We have a couple of weeks that we're, behind in a couple of places, and that's mostly due to us just continuing to learn and know when to pause and slow down and ask hard questions.
Okay.
Just add one other further gloss on opportunity cost to respond to Mrs. McCulloch's question, because I've got a little bit different take on it. I think I've mentioned this before. Return on investment is really a concept that comes out of the business community. And so if you're a business and you've got $100,000 that you can invest in something, you see something where you can get a 10% return on your investment, that sounds really good. But what if there's a different opportunity where you can get 20% return on your investment? That's what you want to invest in. And, having sat here for quite a few years now, I mean, one of my concerns has always been, when we brought proposals, it's always presented as, well, this is a good idea. And what I would really like everybody to be thinking about is this the best idea? And the opportunity cost, when I've used the phrase opportunity cost, the opportunity cost is if we spend our time and money on something that doesn't work as well as something else that we could have invested in. It's a harder thing, I think, for us to do in this context because the universe is so much larger than if you're just a business looking to invest in a new machine or do a capital investment. But it is a mindset that I would really like to see inculcated in this organization. Every time we spend money, what's the opportunity cost? What else could we be doing with this money that might produce a better academic return on investment than what's being proposed?
I appreciate that. I am going to propose to the board, I'll let you tell me what you think. We have 5 consent agenda items that I wanted to review with you. They're all on the docket to be voted on at the next board meeting. I can speak to each of them, or since my time is up, I can wait and speak to them next Tuesday. But that limits, your time in terms of if you wanted to follow up with administration. I noticed that Mr. Rollins doesn't have anything but consent agenda items on his. So is there a time for that, or how would you like me to proceed, Mr. President?
Mr. President had to step away, so Mr. President.
Mr. Vice President, it's your time. How would you like me to
I
proceed?
don't even have consent agenda items tonight, so go ahead.
All righty. The first one is the Urban Learning and Leadership Center, and this is a $170,000 contract. It's the second year of a contract, and it would be under for Lincoln and for Auburn, and it has to do with ESSA accountability. That's how we got into this. Lincoln is going to focus on math, ELA, chronic absenteeism, and parent and community involvement. Auburn is going to focus on academics, social, moral, and parental and community, but they are only focusing on freshmen. Again, this is a contract that we had last year, and we will do again this year if it is approved. The second one is we've already brought this one to your attention, the special ed and early childhood transportation. If you'll remember, the pre-bids were taken on October 13th. We had 8 companies attend those. We had 2 bids to open on November 24th. Sunrise had the lowest responsible bid at $9,047,000. Safeway was second with just about 11 million. One of the questions, and by the way, Sunrise has a 5% escalation for years 2 and 3 that'll take it to 9.5 and 9.975. We have only budgeted for 6.5. I would ask Ms. Yar to be ready to speak to that. How, what that cost difference is, going to where that's coming out of. And she can do that when I'm finished, or she can do that next week, or she can send us an email. The third item on consent is the purchase of the LGBTQIA+ studies collection. This is a $500 item, and it aligns us with House Bill 246, which is now mandating that we include instructions and instructional materials to portray the political, economic, and social contributions of the LGBT community. So these will be instructional materials, and they're brought all together. Instead, we're already working with Newsella, and they will just give us these additional studies without us having to purchase numerous books or other resources. The fourth consent agenda item that we have is our renewal of our teledoc agreement. This is the one where our employees can call in instead of attending an appointment. Their fees are going up. The administration fee is going up from $1.10 to $1.13 per employee per month. They are also increasing the consultant fee for the call, and that is going from $45 to $55 per call. We average about 30 of those a month, and the district responsibility right now is only $30 because the way our agreements have been reached with our employees is that they will pay, Lori, what is it? They must be paying 15. I'm sorry, 15 is the max that they can pay. So right now at 45, they pay 30. Or we were paying 30 and they were paying 15, and going up to 55, the district will have to increase and absorb the extra $10 per, which is at 30 times 12, we figured about what, 3,600. Did I get that right, or is it 36? Help me if I had that wrong. The last is the SAT academic approach. The goal of this was to increase our SAT scores for our 11th graders. The comparable data that we're going to have is from 18-19, because our students didn't take the SAT last year. It was not required. Currently, it is required for this year. We have a new Secretary of Education coming in this month, and we don't know if that's going to change. But one thing that has changed is that a lot of colleges are no longer requiring the SAT as part of the admissions. And so many of our students, for example, last year who didn't take it in the spring, applied to colleges anyways, and when they took it in the fall, many had already accepted placement. So the problem with that is motivation. Part of getting good test scores is that students are motivated to do a good job on them, and you're motivated to do a good job if you want to get into a particular school. So that will be something we'll have to see. There were some problems with this in that we had a late start last year, and so the company that we work with who recruits the teachers had some problems recruiting. We also had problems with attendance last year, averaging in the about 70%. So obviously motivation again is a factor if they want to do well and want to attend these sessions. They will be all virtual. They will be done on Wednesdays. When I say virtual, if a student needs to come into a building to take it virtually, they can. Otherwise, they can take it from home. It is Title I funded, and the cost is increasing from almost 113,000 to 127,000. A large part of that increase, which is about 15,000, is that there's also going to be staff development, and hopefully they're going to teach or work with our staff so that they can develop and use strategies and lessons as part of the daily lessons that they're doing with their students. So it's not all just focused on preparing for the exam, but that they're working on those strategies and lessons throughout the year. And just so you know, I know there's only 4 schools listed in your executive summary, but Roosevelt students aren't listed because they're captured in their home school. So if it's a Guilford zone student who is going to Roosevelt, that would be counted as one of their students. So those are the items that will be on the consent agenda next Thursday. Does anybody have any questions or need follow-up? Is Mrs. Yar there to speak to the busing one?
On vacation.
Oh, that's why she didn't get back to me today. Sorry. So I'm sure we'll have some explanation for how that is going to be captured in next year's budget. Anybody else with questions, comments on any of those? All right. So thank you for the time, Mr. Rollins, and that will give you all an opportunity to review if you need to next time. That ends my report. Thank you.
Mr. Rollins, you can now lead the Planning and Development Committee portion of the meeting.
So I was wrong. I do have one consent agenda, although there's not much to report on. We must have gotten a bid for the Operations Center on Kishwaukee Street. Administration will be recommending approval at the next meeting, but they will not disclose the amount of the bid or the name of the bidder until the meeting. So if you have any questions, I can't answer them. Other than that, I'll say it's been nice to have the month off for this committee, but we are going to be entering the budgeting process, so it was a brief respite.
Okay. Well, I will give the items for the governance committee, and this is going to be on everybody gets to participate question. Well, a few months ago, we started this new governance format with the committees, the governance committee as well, and we approved as a board 3 resolutions. One was the governing mission for the board, and the other 2 related to the structure of the standing committees and the standing committee operating guidelines. Those are all in your board packet, and I'm actually going to ask every board member to give their thoughts on the pluses and the deltas of this change that we've been doing. And the only board member who's going to be exempt from this is Ms. Pearson, because she hasn't experienced what we used to do. So June, I'm going to start with you. Your thoughts on how well things have gone and what things maybe could be better.
think it's gone well. I like the committees and the way that they're structured and the way that we review things kind of ahead of time now. One thing that is kind of difficult is I wish that the preview of consent items was in my agenda for tonight's meeting and I didn't have to flip back and forth.
Okay, all right.
That would just
That's
be
a good idea,
helpful.
yeah.
Other than that, I think it's good. I think it's been a positive step forward.
Mr. Siegel?
I think it's absolutely fabulous because I get to meet with Mr. Earl Dotson Jr.
Okay.
I do like this format, and I like the interaction with cabinet level staff who provide a lot of really detailed questions presented in a really digestible fashion in a meeting that isn't this. And that's been very useful to me in helping to understand some of these bigger ideas. I think it's going to be interesting over the next couple of months to see this work out because the meetings that I had for tonight happened like a month ago. And my memory is decent, but it's not what it used to be. So trying to keep all of this fresh in my head was tough. I probably could have checked in a little bit better. Again, holidays and all of this. It's I do think that this is going to be a positive change. I do like the format, and I do feel a little better engagement on the issues that we're presenting. One other thing that I would suggest, and I can work this out with Earl, is it feels like some of these things that I've reported on in each meeting, I've just been talking with nothing for anyone to see. I know we have board members who like visuals. Need to start putting together something in a short PowerPoint slide saying I talked to whoever and they said. I think that could be helpful too.
Ms. McCulloch, you want to go next? Well, you need to unmute.
Okay, thank you for reminding me of that. I'm going to speak to the consent agenda items not being on there. I too find that it would be helpful with a caveat. They're not always prepared because they get to the end of this week to have those items and their supporting documents in. So unless those can be done in a more timely fashion, although, you know, I was referring to all those tonight, 1 week ahead of time, last month when I was preparing for this before the holidays, of course, nothing was in there, and especially, you know, all those supportive documents weren't in because it's under the draft. And so again, if it's draft, are they going to want to put it on our agenda or put it on without documents? I don't know. So I think that'll need to be thought through. I think it's a great idea, but I don't know if they'll be ready. I think my biggest concern about this, and it's my problem, probably not, but it's that you have board members presenting high-level information to the board that I think can be better presented by a professional who has put that information together. And when I say it's my problem tonight, for example, I chose not to do the system framework myself because I don't think I could have done it justice. Mrs. Detman was kind enough. She went over it with me. I've been over it a couple of times, but it's not something that it doesn't come to me like it would to her, and not just the words, but the concepts and putting it into a cohesive form. And I don't want to just read things, and I think she did a great job. So my response to that is that I may in the future be more likely to have administration, when they put together presentations, bring them forward to the board, and we'll just have to look at how the time goes on that. I think it was interesting that as I was prepping and my husband was listening to me going through things, and when I was going through things with Ms. Devon, and he said, well, what happens when you don't do the whole slide deck? Because we had something last week or last month where a slide deck was put together, but I didn't present the whole thing. I referred to a couple of slides. Does the person who puts that together, the administrator, feel not slighted, but do board members also, because somebody didn't go through and explain all the slides? We were expected just to take what was on the slide and as the total amount of information. So I think there needs to be, I need personally to come to a compromise or an understanding of when it's good for administration to step up, and when it's something that I feel comfortable enough with to explain, because I think it's only fair to the rest of the board to have a good level of information.
Thank you. Good input. Mr. Rollins.
One of the things I'll comment on is one of the things that makes it hard for me to separate out is that I think we started this at about the same time the pandemic hit. And so I actually don't feel like the quality of the discussions is as good as they were before, but I'm not sure whether it's because of the format or because of restrictions that we're under. But one thing I am a little concerned about, and it sort of ties in with what Mrs. McCulloch just said, is I'm concerned that when we've got the board members giving the report, it's perceived as the board member is sort of advocating for whatever it is, and that other board members are less likely to ask probing questions because that may be viewed as, attacking the board member who's given the report, or the board member may not have the background or the depth of knowledge to really answer the questions. So I had, from the beginning, I started doing what Mrs. McCulloch has been talking about, and if it's been a very detailed technical presentation, I'd prefer to have the administration provide the presentation. And I'd like us all to keep in mind that even if one of us is giving the report, that doesn't mean that we're experts on it, and you should really feel free to ask the same sorts of probing questions that you'd be asking about this stuff a year ago. Because I'm not always sure that's been going on since we went to this format.
There are many things I like about the new structure. One thing I will say is that having a determined amount of time for each committee is a good idea, but I think it would be helpful for planning if the heads of those committees, if you're not going to use it, like tonight, it was really good. Mr. Rollins said, hey, I can cede my time. It might make more sense to do that up front, so that Mrs. McCulloch in this case had an hour and a half worth, whatever, and, said that up front. Is there any way this can be accommodated? Because I think the one thing about the committee of the whole is it does go on, God willing. So I think part of the deal is that we accept that committee of the whole goes longer, and that if we plan that time, that works out for me. What I will say is, what I struggle with is when the actual board meetings go longer, and I always ask myself, was there stuff that we should have done, say at committee of the whole, or some alternate means? So that would be the counter to this, is that I expect this to be longer, and that the board sessions, and I think we should be pretty open with the public to say, we've talked a lot about this, and committee of the whole is where a lot of this goes. So, and I know that's not technically possible with everything, but I'm just saying as a general rule, I would say that for me, if you remember the original discussions where we had operations and finance and it was in education, and I think the only thing I'd say is, how do I put this? That the topics, it's been fairly focused, which is really good. I think the only thing that would be helpful would be if the administration, and for that matter, a board member says, we used to talk about A, B, and C more, and now it seems like that's something we need to get back to. I know a couple of you, every once in a while, will make that comment. Hey, we haven't talked about, sports for a while, or, I'm making it up. But the point is that I think, I would hope, normally it'd be the administration that would say, hey, we haven't talked about something. And while it's been pretty good, that would be one thing to keep in mind, because you're really condensing down. No matter how you slice it, we've condensed this down because we're hearing everything presumably one time. So that has been good. This is probably just me, so I'm just going to say it out loud, I've never been a fan of hold your questions till the end. I'm just going to say that. And I understand from a presentation standpoint, you can get interrupted a lot. So I'm very sympathetic because I've been on the other side of that one. Maybe my suggestion would be that if you have 30 slides, that maybe I did like very much when Mrs. Detman said, well, we're not going to really do the timeline. I think that's, if it's fairly factual, I think you can kind of straightforward do that. The only thing that always helps me, and I've articulated this a number of times, is if there's a point in, say, the timeline that you do make it. Say, I don't want to go through it, but my point would be, oh, we're having to rush this. We haven't done it enough, whatever the point is. I treat the presentation of these as the opportunity for particularly the administration, but also the board, when it's appropriate, to comment on something. Because to just go through the points sometimes is less, how do I want to put it? It's less satisfying to me. I really want the insight on some of these that say, and if we do this, these are some of the issues that have come across, in the general research or whatever. So I really always like it when particularly the administration and the experts give insights along with it, and feel free to do so. So that would be my request, but overall I'm a fan of what we've done.
I'll just kind of wrap it up and just say that I think the new committee structure helps give us better structure and focus on the important things. It helps drives the agenda planning. It seemed in the past I didn't have a clue as to what was going to be on the agenda until we did the Thursday planning meeting, whatever. So now we have agendas prepared, we already have all of the January meetings already planned out. I think the new format helps with engagement of board members, and it brings board members into the process earlier, which I think is always good. We can ask questions, have you thought about this or whatever. Does seem to add quantity to the committee of the whole, which is probably appropriate or whatever. And Ms. McCulloch, I just want to give you my opinion on what I think what you did was fine. That's my opinion. I think if we are not the content experts on many things, because this isn't what we do full-time for a living. I don't have a problem at all with a board member sharing the presentation with the liaison content expert. And maybe the board member gives an introduction and maybe does the wrap up, and then the content expert, the liaison person, presents the middle part. That's just my thoughts. I don't think there's anything wrong with that idea at all. So, okay, Mrs. Hoadley, do you have any other follow-up on that? Because you are the queen of the governance committee. You get a crown and everything. Okay.
Well, I do have a couple of comments. I know that this has been a struggle both for administration and for the board, and for me trying to carry out what you all had adopted as a whole, on what your vision was, or you adopted from Mr. Edie. So the one interesting thing I heard tonight, a lot of really good suggestions and amendments and stuff, but I think the thing that struck me, and I think, Mr. Rollins, thank you for being so candid about it, about the adversarial part of it, or attacking, feeling attacked during a presentation. Certainly administration has felt that from board members from time to time. And there may be specific times that it's earned on this side of the fence. But at the same time, the whole intent is that we're all in this ship together. And they really need all of your leadership in order to steer it appropriately and make sure that it's going in the direction. So this committee structure should help with that, because in your leadership roles as the committee chairs and the board president, you have a much deeper role in helping to set the direction of the district and make sure that we're acting as appropriate partners in that voyage that we're on together. So I know that I think it makes you uncomfortable at times, because you feel like you also have that oversight, ensuring that fiscal responsibility and that you're meeting the needs of the students and constituents and stuff. And so sometimes there's that natural tension in the relationship between the board and administration. But hopefully this will help, this current structure will help you be able to that tension, but help steer the ship in a better manner. So that's what I've seen out of this. I think she would not be content experts in certain areas, and so to defer to administration when needed. The only thing I would say that I've not seen yet, and I've struggled on trying to figure out how to help you, is the discussion. For those of you who participated in the Saturday meetings, when they were hosted at Swedes, they seem much more relaxed and more conversational. And so I think that's what's kind of lacking. We're getting too much back into, let's get the presentation and pick that apart, or just focus on that, or go brain numb from somebody talking way too long so that you forget your questions or whatever. And you're not getting that dialogue that's so critical in advancing ideas and getting where you all want to go. So I don't know how to get you to that point in trying to focus the time, but identifying those priorities. So I think as committee chairs, you could work with your staff liaisons to help identify those kind of priorities where you really want to focus the conversation. That was my only point.
So Mrs. Hoadley is the liaison for me on the governance. I'm going to have Mr. Dotson Jr., if you will give us your thoughts about, and Ms. Detman's going to go too. So Michelle is not here tonight, so we have
Please.
Earl
Dr.
is the liaison for the internal external stakeholders, Mr. Siegel's committee.
So thank you. So really quickly, so I will agree with Mr. Siegel in that obviously I'm very relational, and so he and I have a great working relationship. We've built up a level of trust with each other, and that's important because we can be very candid and very honest in our conversations. We're both very passionate about some of the same things, so I appreciate that relationship. I agree with you, Mr. Scrivano, with the thought of, I really like the idea, to your point about getting in on the ground level, right? It's the analogy of you're helping pick the groceries, right? We're not bringing you a finished product. You're right there with us as we kind of bring these new initiatives to the board. So I like you all being on the ground level as we kind of decide some of these things. To Mr. Rollins' point and to Lori's point, I think Doug, when those Saturday meetings with Doug Edie, and I think the pandemic obviously has a lot to do with it, but the conversational aspect, right? And I think the way the room was structured, I think that has a lot to do with it. The distance, it's very formal. The glass, and so I think hopefully post-pandemic we can get in a setting where that is conducive to having more conversations. But right now it does feel very distant and back to a very formal way of kind of having these conversations. So I agree, Mr. Rollins, that it feels a little weird, but I think it has a lot to do with, when you're partnering with someone, your space and how you conversate has a lot to do with that. So, but that would be my only delta, but really love the new structure.
Hey, Mr. Dotson, this is Mrs. McCulloch. Thank you for having us get the groceries and not be the farmer.
Thank you. You enjoyed that analogy, Mrs. McCulloch.
I suppose I would add that I think we're transitioning from agenda to agenda, item by item, into a more strategic approach, committee by committee, which is good. And Ms. McCulloch and I took the opportunity in December to kind of stop what we had been doing for prep previously, which was, okay, we have a phone call or a Zoom meeting, and every 15 minutes we've got somebody with a new agenda item that's just dumping information for us to sift through and prioritize, and we stopped. And we just had a complete level set of, let's go back to Doug Edie's notes. What are we supposed to be accomplishing together as partners, and how can we do that? And what I appreciated in our efforts in December is it gave me a lot of guidance on where we're not being clear enough in what we're trying to accomplish across some of these major initiatives. Because from my perspective as a presenter at a lot of these meetings, often I'm not really sure what the target is that I'm trying to hit. And so we present it all sometimes, or sometimes not enough, and it's hard to find kind of where the board is really looking to go in some of these priorities. So by having the staff liaison and committee chair relationship, we have representative voices that are going to help us to kind of steer our time and energy where it really belongs. So I appreciate that aspect, and I think that's where Ms. McCulloch and I have grown the most in the last month or so, is getting clearer on that and less about, accomplishing the agenda and more about prioritizing the agenda.
Jarrett, your thoughts?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I just want to express my gratitude that, that the board and the entire cabinet have come together as a team to try this really different experiment. And I do think we've seen some real benefits in coming together as a team around this, whether it's been the planning process, whether it's been the relationship building from the committee chairs, working with the staff liaisons. I think that's been really encouraging, and I do feel this is facilitating that. My greatest criticism of the work was already highlighted by Mrs. Hoadley, in that I would love to get to a place where less is more, and we have deeper, richer conversations and discussions over a smaller number of topics. If we could almost tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 the items in a way, and I think we did a little of that tonight. I thought tonight was a real step in the right direction, and I think we're getting better at that. And so I loved the idea of hearkening back to the Saturday morning meetings, and maybe we need to just keep that in mind about what retreats might look like and things like that. But I do also feel like the formality that the COVID safety protocols create, the lack of fresh student achievement data, which I think we had some really rich conversations about how our schools were performing last year prior to the pandemic, and we really haven't had an easy time doing some of that. So, I think some of it is natural, but I'm way, way more encouraged than I am discouraged with how we've started so far. And I think I'm just really appreciative that the board and the management team have just really together dove into this work head first, and I think the best is ahead of us.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes. Go ahead.
Can I make a comment? Everybody keeps saying that you'd like deeper conversations about smaller number of topics, but to do that, I think to have a good conversation, you have to have the information and background. And that is where I struggled with the reports and having, for example, a slide deck put together, because I could come in, I could understand it, I could give you pieces of it or an overview or a review or a summary. But to have a really good conversation, you have to have the information to base that on. And so that is part of the issue with, for example, a board member who may not be presenting as much of that information. So I think that that's a balance as well.
And reminder also that the committee chairs will be rotated. So that will give everybody, over a period of time, experience and opportunities and that and all that kind of good stuff. So that we'll review that. And,
So, Mr. Scrivano, part of that comment was, we need to know how much information our board members want on the floor during a committee of the whole, as a board, as a chair. So, any sort of feedback that anybody might have to that would be helpful.
okay. Any other final thoughts? We did have a couple of speakers, but we don't anymore. They have drawn their request to present. There you go. Okay, so.
What were their topics, Ken?
I don't know, but I think they were about the boundary, the redistricting the boundaries, or the changes that was presented on the boundary lines for zones. Yeah.
Well, they have to write it on their card. Doesn't Laura have their card? Is that what it was?
They did it online, didn't they?
The speaker requests were made through Let's Talk, and so all they put on their speaker request that they were opposed to the boundary changes.
We've been having some administrative conversations online, and I think there's some satisfaction that we're going to be bringing some ideas forward to the board as early as next month for it to react.
Right. Seeing if is there any other agenda items for tonight or comments? Do you have, Mr. Connor?
Yeah, just one quick thing. I neglected to say, and I thought of it as we were talking, is traditionally the time, speaking of comments, that people use, as in the public, the community, tends to be the formal board meetings. And one of the things I think that we should get in the habit, whomever we talk to, but particularly those that are staff, is that really this is the meat and potatoes meeting, that if there's anything that people should attend, it would be here, where it is a bit more informal, and hopefully it was a great suggestion about making it more like Saturdays. But I really, as I looked across, the empty chairs, and I know a lot of this is COVID, but the thing that I would say is that we should, and I would encourage like communications to really make it clear that for the, if I might say so, the media in general, not that we get covered a lot unless there's some controversy, that this is the place that, because it's not the drama of the votes, but this is where a lot of the discussions are that lead to sometimes very short discussions. Anyway, my point would be fairly simple, that we should be encouraging people to attend this one, because this is where really a lot of the information is brought about that I think the community would be interested in.
Mr. Scrivano, are you going to go over what takeaways or what we're going to get back as part of this meeting? My pieces on the disaggregated demographics of all the employee groups that they're going to put together for that 815 group, and the percentage of certified staff in the region, and also the budgeting piece for the Sunrise contract, because it was what?
Go ahead, one, right? You on
30% more. No, 50% more, right? We budgeted 6 million and it's 9 million. Okay.
I did forget that we do have some consent agenda items for January. Let me get to them. Minutes, purchase orders, workers' comp, superintendent contract, and freedom of information log. Administrative appointments and the HR report. That's for the first regular meeting. And for the second one, minutes, contract purchase orders, workers' comp, and freedom of information log, administrative appointments, and HR report. So our consent agenda items for our next two board meetings. So any other comments or agenda items for tonight? Not. I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
By Mr. Siegel. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Sign. We are adjourned at 8:03.
Thank you, Ken.